Let me give you an argument. One of the things that I say that I think people find interesting is that I believe the National Academy of Sciences and the National Science Foundation effectively conspired against American scientists and engineers on behalf of scientific and engineering employers. That's a fascinating story. I shout it in the public square. Now, I've been asked 4 times to the National Academy of Sciences to discuss this. So they are certainly taking this quite seriously. I've talked to the actual people who are involved with this. It is amazingly interesting. You could sell clicks. You could just get advertisers to buy for the clicks on this story. Nobody's going to run the story. Nobody has run the story in, I don't know, more than 20 years. It's sitting there on servers. I don't believe that this is all being driven by profit. I believe that there is some force that we don't understand that keeps the gated institutional narrative gated.
Yes, I think profit is one part of it. That's why I say we have to think of profit as one aspect of kind of power or rivalrous dynamic more largely, because it's, I think, government or academia or religious or cultural groups or profit can all influence the nature of narrative and information.
I think there's an economy of shame and terror.
Say more about that.
I believe that the real reason that this works the way it does is we have not even gotten to a very basic point where it is considered acceptable to say, I want immigration restricted. Now, I point this out because I think it's very funny. Most people who want immigration restricted enjoy food from other cultures. They have friends who come from other places. They enjoy travel. There's nothing xenophobic about them. In general, they are xenophilic.
Yeah.
And the idea that you can be both xenophilic, fascinated and interested in the world's cultures, and want immigration to your country restricted, and that this is the generic position, that the average person holds this position, is a story that appears nowhere. So nobody has an idea that xenophilic restrictionists might be a plurality or a majority in the country, because there is a rule that says anyone who calls for restriction of immigration must be tarred as a xenophobe.
Right.
And I think it's time to double dog dare the people who are keeping this level of discipline to say, why is it impossible to be a xenophilic restrictionist? What I think is that the economy of shame is such that whoever acts first to make this point is in such danger for their livelihood, their reputation, that they are going to be tarred and feathered. And one of the things that I'm trying to show people is that you can make these points. Now, I can't do this on CNN, but I can do this on pirate radio. This is basically audio samizdat, to take the Russian underground mimeograph movement as a template. We can say things here, but there's only a matter of time before this starts to become problematic to the institutional structure. And it responds by debiting my account. Oh, well, that's that alt-right guy. Yeah, he seems disgruntled, or he seems gloomy and out of touch. And then the fear, uncertainty, and doubt campaign starts, and that's what is actually keeping everybody in line. It's not that there isn't money to be made. There's tons of money to be made. What's happened is that it's been too easy to pick off the initial adopters.
I agree, and I'm curious what your explanation of how that phenomena emerged.
Oh, that's so let's really get into it. We did have a dissension suppression unit inside of the FBI, which was called COINTELPRO. And it tried to induce Martin Luther King Jr. to suicide through a letter from Sullivan, who was, I think, number 1 or number 2, maybe under Hoover. This thing lived inside of the FBI. It probably tried to tell John Lennon that he was traitorous. It tried to humiliate Gene Seberg, who was a Black Panther supporter, by planting false information inside of mainstream media, Newsweek and the Los Angeles Times. It tried to get La Cosa Nostra to kill Dick Gregory, the famous comedian and Black civil rights leader. So we did have a dirty tricks unit inside of the United States that needs to be known broadly, which was pretty thoroughly investigated in the mid-1970s. And once we saw that we were engaged in these dirty tricks against our own people, we were kind of shocked and flipped out. And the economy wasn't in great shape. And then Ronald Reagan came riding in, and I think he pardoned Mark Felt, who had been the head of COINTELPRO after Hoover, but he was also Deep Throat. And so you had this very strange situation that we got this reboot during the Reagan years where we went back to some sort of more traditional, more patriotic, imagined version of our country. And my belief is that in part, when Bill Clinton decided that he couldn't take yet another loss to the Republican Party, he was going to start experimenting with republicanism inside of the Democratic Party. By that point, we had two parties that more or less were two flavors of the same thing. I refer to that collective as the looting party. And the looting party, the neoliberals, the neoconservatives, sort of intergenerational warfare within the country in the U.S. And my take on it is that the common ideology is that profit had to be found abroad, and so you had to loosen the bonds to your fellow citizens. And that's where all of this kind of the market always knows best. We need to offshore and downsize and securitize, and what I've called the new gimmick economy. So that right now we're waking up from the new gimmick economy, and having never lived in anything really authentic unless we're quite old. So my belief is that during that period of time, there was very swift retribution for anyone who dissented. Famously, a prominent trade theorist who was talking about the benefits of restriction, of trade restrictions for infant industries, let's say, apparently got a call from one of the people high up in the field and said, "Oh, you seem to be a very bright young man. It would be a shame if anything happened to your career." And so this kind of idea suppression is the hallmark. Well, it is what I think these two generations, the baby boomers and the silent generation, may become best known for in the future. That this was a period in which new corrective ideas had to be suppressed because of the fragility of the system. We saw the fragility break out in 2008. We saw how vulnerable we were in 2001. And we see that the whole sense-making apparatus is breaking down from the Trump election. So these have been the three moments when the gated institutional narrative has broken because it just got overwhelmed by events. But other than that, the key was making sure that people like you or like me or like Peter are not mainstream. The cost of listening to us has to be driven to astronomical levels. So we have to look wild-eyed. We have to, they can't call me uneducated if I have a Harvard PhD, which is one of the funny parts of the system. But the idea is that you have to say, well, maybe he used to be smart, but he's gone fringe. So the social cost of
it's amazing how effective such small amounts of that can be.
Well, it's also just funny. Yeah. I mean, there's so many hours of audio of us. And I was just astounded, for example, with the number of people who would try to portray, let's say, my brother as right wing. I mean, from my perspective, can you imagine making that decision that you have a guy as far left as Brett and you're going to spend your credibility pretending that he's like allied with the Nazis? It doesn't even make sense to me because it's simply, to me, a way to incinerate your credibility. And yet, the way the system works is you incinerate people's viability. It's economic warfare that if your reputation is damaged, you can't be trusted. And that's how this enforcement has worked. So you asked me the question, how does it work to keep this in line? It's too trivially easy to destroy individuals. And my question has always been, is there a program which I have tentatively called No Living Heroes?